Let's start in Sudan now, where fighting could be heard in Khartoum earlier today. Despite the extension of the ceasefire for a further 72 hours, the United Nations, meanwhile, has warned of a humanitarian breaking point as clashes enter a third week. Now, the rival military forces have kept fighting through a series of ceasefires, which both have accused the other of breaking. The fighting has sent tens of thousands of people fleeing into neighbouring countries and has deepened the humanitarian crisis in Sudan, where a third of the people already depend on some form of assistance. At the same time, the UNs World Food Programme says it's lifting the suspension it placed on its operations after 3 of its team members were killed in the clashes on April the 16th. At least 528 people have been killed and 4,599 wounded, but the UN believes the real toll is much higher. All right, now let's get the latest from Khartoum. Now across to our reporter, Naba Muhyiddin. Naba, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. It is quite concerning what the UN is saying. Of course, this infighting enters its third week with the United Nations warning of a humanitarian breaking point. Now, you are in Khartoum at the epicenter of the fighting. Talk to us about what's the very latest there now.
Yes, the fighting in Khartoum is still going on in different parts of the capital, including eastern Khartoum, eastern Nile City, and southern Khartoum and northern Khartoum. The fighting is still fierce, especially in northern Khartoum, Bahri, which is the nearest town to or city to the presidential palace and the military headquarters. Fighting pace is slower than the days before. The ceasefire is not well respected, but it's better than the 3-4 days before. We are still hearing and seeing smoke and fighting in different places of the capital. And the bad thing right now is the lack of security and law and order. Beside the fighting between the two warring factions, there is a wide looting of houses, offices, banks, industrial areas, factories, properties. So the situation is really chaotic. And regarding the humanitarian situation, it is still deteriorating. There is shortages and outages of water, electricity, food, medicine, and the hospitals cannot operate very well. There is good news about a shipment of UN that has docked in the regional water of Sudan. We are expecting that it will enter port of Sudan within the next few days, and that will help a lot in relieving the humanitarian situation and for hundreds of thousands of people who fled the war in Khartoum in different parts, including Port Sudan, Northern State, West Darfur, Khartoum, and Al Jazeera State.
Now, of course, we've been hearing of, just the dramatic process of the evacuation of foreigners in Sudan. Of course, South Africans also rescued from that country. Talk to us about how that process is going on, especially because we know that the fighting is continuing. And as you're saying, there are questions being raised about security.
Actually, if I heard you very well about the evacuation process, it went very well at some point, but it was also risky. A lot of countries evacuated their citizens and nationals through Wadi Sayidna in Durman, which is a military airport. But now it's not possible and it's risky, and a lot of countries urge their citizens to stop coming to Wadi Sayidna because the RSF and military right now are extending their operations very close to that airport. And 2 days ago, a Turkish aircraft was targeted by the clashes, and the military accused RSF of violating this humanitarian corridor or humanitarian ceasefire. Other evacuation is done through Port Sudan, which is very far in eastern Sudan, and it's in the Red Sea shores opposite to Jeddah. So many countries evacuated their citizens and nationals through Port Sudan. There is still some of evacuation processes and ships. People are still awaiting for it. Yesterday, American citizens, a new batch of American citizens just have been evacuated, and today we are expecting British citizens to be evacuated from Port Sudan. Syrians, Yemeni, other Arab nationals are still waiting their role to be evacuated in Port Sudan, and that is also causing a huge scarcity and shortage of supply in the city, because Port Sudan is not big and the number of people who are awaiting to be evacuated is bigger than the state capabilities.
Earlier on, I spoke to a spokesperson representing UNICEF, and he painted a very bleak picture in terms of just the plight that children in that country are currently facing. Already we know that there was issues with malnutrition for over 3 million children in Sudan. Talk to us about how NGOs are assisting in this regard.
Actually, NGOs were not able to give their hand or to do any kind of humanitarian aid in the past 2 weeks, because whenever there is an announced ceasefire by the two sides, there is a violation of that ceasefire, and humanitarian corridors were not safely secured for NGOs to help those in need. So most of the efforts were done domestically, and it was internal efforts by neighborhoods, by resistance committee, pro-democracy groups, and by neighbors who volunteer to help those in need. And after WFP office was targeted in Darfur and 3 officers were killed, their warehouses were stolen and robbed, WFP suspended their operations. But luckily right now, after 2 weeks of this war, and after the humanitarian and health situation reached a breaking point, the UN decided to resume their operations in the country. The World Food Programme will start their operation after they evacuated their staff from the capital Khartoum to safer places. They will eventually operate from other states like Port Sudan, in the Red Sea state, in Al Jazeera state. There is a lot of efforts underway, including WFP, WHO, and other Red Crescent and Red Cross. So we are awaiting these efforts to make fruitful results, because the situation is unbearable for hundreds of thousands of people who fled the war. From Khartoum to other regions, people in the borders are suffering. People of Al Janeina who fled the war to Chad are suffering. So there is a plan by the UN, and there is a shipment in the Port Sudan contains medicine, food, urgent and life necessities is underway, and it will be distributed to various regions very soon.
Naba, thank you so much for that update and for your time this afternoon. That's our reporter, Naba Mohuddin, coming to us live there from Khartoum, of course, giving us the very latest in the Sudan crisis.